Outreach Manager for Maine Audubon, and we'll be doing a program today called State of the Birds: Decades of Change. So what I'm going to be talking about is a whole bunch of different bird species in Maine whose populations are going up or populations are going down and why they're doing that. Okay, there's a lot to cover. I'm going to jump in. I am contractually obligated to start with this slide. Maine Audubon is the oldest and largest wildlife conservation organization in the state, 10,000 members, 2,000 volunteers, chapters all over the state, wildlife sanctuaries. The closest here is probably Borestone Mountain in Monson. And we're a great organization. We are an independent organization. We're not part of the National Audubon Society, but we do a lot of similar things. We've been independent since 1843, if you can believe that, when we started as the Portland Society for Natural History. We got a great mission. We do education. We teach thousands of kids and adults about Maine wildlife. We have scientists on staff doing conservation, learning about how populations are shifting. And then we have that science informs our advocacy, which I'm part of, bringing what we've learned to Augusta or to DC to try to make Maine a better place. So if you're not a member, join on up. But I'm really a birder. I'm just a birder at heart. That's really what I love and care about. There are tons of birds in Maine, over 300 different species. Like I said, sometimes our populations are going up, sometimes our populations are going down. So what I'm going to talk about is why. There are a bunch of things causing birds' ranges to expand or contract, and it's important to sort of learn all about them and interesting, I think. So we'll start here, natural change. So which birds' ranges are changing naturally? I'll tell you, you can make an argument that every bird here has been making a natural expansion over the past 18,000 years. Before that, we were under an ice shelf, right? There were no birds living. Well, I don't know. Maybe, I don't know, ox or some other ice-loving bird. But we didn't have chickadees. We didn't have other birds here when we were under the glaciers 18,000 years ago. As that glacier naturally expanded, the tundra came in, then the boreal came in, and now the eastern forests have come in. And so many birds here have sort of a natural change. I got to start there. But then there are some more specific ones. This bird is one of my favorite birds in the world, maybe the most beautiful.
Evening grosbeak.
Oh, yeah, we got a birder up here. Nice job. This is an evening grosbeak, a beautiful bird named because the first people who saw it used to think that it only came out at night. Just completely false. I don't know what they were thinking. I like to think that it looks like a sunset, sort of an evening bird. Beautiful. This is a bird that when I started birding in the early 2000s was considered very rare and rapidly declining, right? And if you look at charts of sightings of evening grosbeaks in Maine, you can see that there was a sharp decline in the early 90s. These birds are really disappearing. One quick note, I'm going to show some graphs like this throughout. This birds per party hour thing is a little confusing. All this does is that there are more birders looking in 2020 than 1960, and so this sort of equalizes for that. So we're not seeing way more birds, there's more people out looking, right? So this is sort of a steady one. But anyway, they both show a big, strong decline. And nobody knew what was going on, right? So evening grosbeaks were gone. We didn't know why. This was a sort of disappearance that happened to a bunch of other species, especially of certain species that frequented our boreal habitats, so sort of northern Maine spruce forests. Just shout them out, man, if you got them.
Well, the top, that's a female evening grosbeak.
Female evening grosbeak, bay-breasted warbler, Tennessee warbler, Cape May warbler. My birder heart flutters as I even say these names. They're such great birds. But they were all declining. We didn't know why. Until we scientists made the connection to this little guy. You ever heard of this? Eastern spruce budworm. Eastern spruce budworm is a moth. And like many insects, it undergoes a cyclical pattern of their populations. They have these years of outbreaks where there's everywhere. They have these years where they're not around. Foresters know these birds well, these insects well, because these are a big pest for spruce trees. And so the timber industry really does not like the big years when they're around. But what does this have to do with birds? So why are birds here during the summer? They're eating insects. Yeah.
I'm guessing that it has poison in it, and when the birds eat it,
Not true.
poison effect.
That would be cool, but no poison. Birds eat insects, right? That's the reason they come. They make this crazy migration all the way to Maine in the summer, so they can eat the tons of insects we have in the forest. That's what they're doing here. And in certain years where there are big outbreaks of spruce budworms, that means there's a ton more food for these birds to eat, right? And so if you go back a little bit, well, first actually I'll go back here, so you can see 70 to 80 was a big outbreak of spruce budworm. You can see 70s and 80s there was a ton of even grosbeaks found, and then when that outbreak faded, the birds faded too. So what scientists started to understand was that this wasn't necessarily a dire future for the evening grosbeaks and some of these birds, but it's part of a natural sort of growth and decline in populations that follow insect outbreaks. Their food, right? And so we were able to test that recently because there was another sort of mini outbreak of spruce budworms over the past decade. And this is a very complicated looking slide, but what you need to know is that it shows that the populations of those birds I mentioned before are going up, right? Went up as spruce budworms spread. They have more food to eat, they can support more babies, they're surviving on the landscape. This happened for bay-breasted, Tennessee warbler, Cape May warbler. Why is this important too? This is important to understand the connection between spruce budworm and bird populations, because as I mentioned, spruce budworm is managed by the timber industry. They don't want them eating their timber. This is a plain in Canada spraying DDT. You may have heard of that. We'll talk about that one in a little bit. And so a better understanding of the connection between insecticides and insects and birds is helpful for management of these species. And guess what? Evening grosbeaks are doing great. Do you have them up here? You have them more than I do in southern Maine, probably. Good for you. This was from 2000. Remember that winter, that pandemic winter, 2000? There were tons of finches in parts where they aren't usually. It was one of the only good things about that year. That's it for natural change. Everything else is stuff we've done, okay? So I'm going to go through a bunch of man-made changes to talk about how we have impacted bird ranges on our own. Starting with this guy here. What do we got? Another beauty.
It's some kind of kestrel, isn't it?
It's an American kestrel. Great job. Awesome. Kestrels are awesome. They are falcons. They're small falcons, birds of prey. They zip around grabbing like grasshoppers and things, you know what I mean? They're not going to cause danger for you, but if you're a grasshopper, you do not want to see this guy looking at you. A kestrel. Another bird here. A tree swallow. Tree swallow. These are aerial insectivores. They fly wicked fast over fields and things, trying to grab insects out of midair. This is a bobolink. Beautiful black bird, makes crazy calls. All these birds are on the decline in Maine. Okay, so here's kestrel sightings since 1975. This here is averaging the routes, just so you see we're doing the same amount of birding and fewer kestrels. What do all these birds have in common? These three is that their preferred habitat is fields. Yeah.
Another thing they have in common is that they all eat insects.
Right, absolutely right. They love fields and they eat insects. And one of the ways that we measure bird populations is through these things called breeding bird atlases, where people cover the state for like 5 years or so, counting all the birds during breeding season to get a sense every couple of decades of how population is doing. Maine finished our last one was 1983. We just finished ours, but the results are not out yet. But we do have the atlas for Massachusetts, which is out to give us, it's not too different from Maine. This is their page for kestrels. A red triangle means a decreasing population, right? So you can see every single part of Massachusetts is experiencing declining kestrels. Same thing here for tree swallows and bobolinks are all on the decline. So the thing they have in common is fields, and guess what Maine has disappeared a lot of in the past several decades? Yeah.
Insects because of pesticides and DDT.
That's true, but also fields. So this is a chart showing the percent of the state of Maine in agriculture over time. And so you can see it peaks here in 1870, where this is the percentage of states. So over 60% of the state of Maine was in agriculture. Can you believe that? If you think about how big Maine is, that includes Allagash, man, this is the whole state. So 60%, 6 out of every 10 acres was an agricultural field at that point. That still blows my mind when I think about it. That number has declined by quite a bit, just over 5% now. And this slide is a little, I haven't found a more updated slide, it may be even smaller than that. Yeah.
Is the implication of that chart that what used to be fields is now woodland?
Great point.
Or is it just not used for agriculture?
So, if it were woodland, you could say that this is maybe a bit of a biodiversity trade-off, right? Where we are losing acreage for grassland birds, but we're gaining acreage for forest birds. And so maybe you could say, I don't know if this is good or bad, we're gaining bird habitat. But what not happening is it's actually not going into woodlands, it's being developed, right? So about 1 million acres of the state of Maine has gone from agriculture to developed housing land since 1900. So that's 1 million acres that's really not producing the kind of biodiversity that either a field or a woodland has. This type of housing development, which of course we all need, people need to live in places, and it has its own suite of birds and things that come with it. We'll talk about some of those in a little bit. Actually, one of them is right here. So here's a bird that is way on the increase, right? So you see 1968 here, there's basically none of these birds reported in Maine. And I'll give you a hint. So this is a bird that loves human habitation, right?
Cardinal!
We talked about this before. Cardinal. Or the cardinal. I was born after 1968. I thought the cardinals were everywhere all the time. We were just talking about this a minute ago, where in the 70s, she had to call, it was like a big to-do. People were coming up and checking out her backyard because she said she had a cardinal in it. They were very rare in Maine until the past few decades. Here's another one.
A pine. No, that's not.
Close.
Bluebird.
Eastern bluebird, yeah.
Bluebird.
Eastern bluebirds, especially in the winter time, were very rare. And look at this. This is 2006 right here. Right, so this is very, very recently. Both of these birds have benefited from suburban habitats, right? From the type of housing developments that we put out. Cardinals love bushes and shrubberies, right? They love that stuff. And that's what we put between our houses, right? So that's not necessarily the type of habitat you have in woodlands or in a field. This is stuff that we planted. Bluebirds love berries, right? Especially berries that go throughout the winter. Bluebirds used to migrate long distances between Maine and other places. But once they found ornamental trees that we planted, they're like, I'll just, instead of that big, long, dangerous, hard migration, I'm going to just eat these berries all winter. Does that sound right? So the winter population of bluebirds has really exploded as we've provided food they don't need to migrate. Okay? So this one. Remember, we're talking about man-made land use change. Let me know when you see the bird. Hopefully that displays. Come on.
See it.
Wait. This is a video. There we go. Yes. Hey, there it is. Well, I know, the video's a little jittery. Piping plover. You're right. Piping plover. This is a changing of the guard on the eggs here. One parent is coming in and sheltering the egg from the sun as the other one moves in. Very cool. Beautiful birds. Let me see if I can put a picture. Okay. This is what they're protecting here, a little cutie. Piping plovers nest on beaches. Beaches, before there were people around, were a pretty good place to nest, right? Although a little dangerous, right? Because you're out there and you're exposed. To protect themselves, these piping plovers have become incredibly well camouflaged. They've evolved to look exactly like the beaches. I have been walking on the beaches, don't tell anyone, and almost stepped on them because they're so well camouflaged. They're brown on their back is just like the sand. The little black piping on their bodies looks just like this dried rack seaweed here. They're remarkable birds. And lived on the beaches, right? It's right next to their food source. They have a good life. And then people came along and started using beaches in a different way, right? We sunbathe and let our dogs run and do that kind of stuff. Made a pretty hard world for piping plovers on the beaches. In the early 80s, the piping plovers were listed, the Atlantic population, on the Endangered Species Act. Maine Audubon came in to help, right? So we have this piping plover team. We work with beaches and municipalities and the feds and volunteers to identify nests that we see on the beaches, to block them off from predators. There's tons of predators, foxes, skunks, raccoons, cats and dogs. So we cordon off the nest to protect the eggs and the chicks, and we work with the towns to say, hey, can we, have a leash law here, things like that. And guess what? It's been working like crazy. It works like crazy. This is sort of a theme of the program, is that conservation, when you put your mind to it, put some effort into it, it works. It works. So all of these species that we have altered their ranges or altered their threatened their populations, we can reverse the challenges in many cases if we can recognize our behavior and change it. Piping plovers are way up. This is this is even old. In 2021, so this went from fewer than 20 pairs in 1981 to 125 pairs as of 2021. I'm sorry, 1981 to 2021. Now over 10 times. Same deal with this bird, another beach nesting bird. This is a least tern. And they similarly are going up. Their populations are a little more susceptible. They nest in colonies, which means that if a fox, say, and this has happened, comes in and just goes berserk on a colony, it can take out a big chunk of the population. So that's why you see some of these bigger up and down shifts. What you can do, so I'm going to end each of these sections with a little what you can do thing. To help with land use or habitat loss is plant native plants. One of our big initiatives at Maine Audubon is a native plant initiative. Native plants provide the insects, caterpillars, and moths that native birds need to survive, right? So you can have your backyard and have it be filled with beautiful plants, but it can also support bird populations if you put the right plants back there. A lot of times when we plant plants that are from other countries, they can't support insects because of the way that evolution has caused these defenses between tree plants, right? So like, just a quick explainer on that. Like, caterpillars eat leaves. Leaves don't want to be eaten. Trees develop defenses to try to get the caterpillars off. Caterpillars figure out how to get around the defenses. A lot of times they specialize, and so one caterpillar is really dependent on one particular species. Like milkweed, right? If you have milkweed, you'll have monarchs. If you don't have milkweed, you're not going to have it. They need it. So planting native plants is the way to get the birds that you want. Okay. And another part of man-made change is direct interaction. I'll explain what that means a little bit. Okay. Who knows this rare bird? What?
Turkey.
Turkey. Wild turkey. Go. Got it. Wild turkeys. Wild turkeys, not so long ago, were extremely rare in Maine. Extremely rare. Why? Because of our direct interaction. We just shot them all. We ate them. Turkeys are delicious. Okay, and we didn't have any regulated hunting for a long time, and we extirpated turkeys from Maine. But turkeys are native here. They're supposed to live here. They do well when left to their devices, and so when Maine and other places started regulating hunting, having bag limits and seasons, we started reintroducing some turkeys from Vermont. It's a bit of a sore spot. The ancestry of Maine's native turkeys are from Vermont. But guess what? It works like crazy. We know. I'm sure you have turkeys. I'm sure you had to fight off turkeys to get your cars to come here, right? This is, I mentioned, our previous bird atlas was from 1983. This is that's a page from that. This is the turkeys. There you can see there are some turkeys in York County, and then up in the mid-coast area. That's it. That's all the turkeys they found. These were both. I know this one is a reintroduced population. I think this one was too. But now, so this is a slide from eBird. The blue dots, which you can't really see, are all turkey sightings. Turkeys are everywhere. I don't need to explain, right? And a little bit of inside baseball. This is the slide from the Massachusetts atlas showing which bird species have grown the most since their previous atlas. Turkey up here at number 1. Tons more turkeys. So when left to their own devices, when we figure out what impacts we're causing to the birds, shooting them without regulation or thought, when we change that, birds come back. Here's another.
Bald eagle.
Brain buster. Got it. Bald eagle. In 1967, there were 21 pairs of bald eagles in the entire state of Maine. 21. We have a lot of great bald eagle habitat here. 21 is a low number. What was happening? We figured it out, especially Rachel Carson resides partly in Maine. Or used to reside partly in Maine. Yes.
The DDT was going into the rivers and getting into the fish that the eagles ate, and when they ate the fish with the DDT, their egg couldn't hatch. So,
Absolutely right.
and if they laid the eggs too late in the season, then the eggs weren't mated either, so they couldn't lay eggs.
Winner. If you folks couldn't hear, we were spraying a chemical called DDT. I'll tell you that I know the whole thing, but what it stands for, but I don't. DDT was a chemical, an insecticide, and it had the very cruel effect of what we call bioaccumulating in the body. So it would get into the rivers, it would get in the bodies of the fish. The eagles would eat the fish, and over time, a lot of that DDT would concentrate in their bodies. And what it did was it made their eggs very brittle. So they would incubate their eggs, and the eggs would break. Very sad and terrible. But guess what? We figured it out. As a society, we figured it out. We figured out that this was killing our bald eagles and our ospreys and other fish-eating creatures. And we worked to ban it, right? This was one of the biggest early conservation wins in the 60s and 70s. And guess what? When we change our behavior and figure out our problems and fix them, they come back, right? Did anybody see bald eagles today? Well, probably did, right? Bald eagles, there are, so I said in 1967 there were 21 nesting pairs. The last count, 737, right? Off the endangered species Act, yeah.
We just had Ron Joseph here a couple
Cool.
of weeks ago. Have you talked to him about
Yeah.
this? Because he helped with the reintroduction and some of and he had some pretty cool stories about
Sure.
setting feeding stations where they would bring carcasses for all of the eagles to eat because they were really trying to bring them back. It was really cool. But
It took a lot of work. It wasn't as simple as just sort of passing a law. But when we got rid of what we knew was causing all the trouble, Maine is great for them to live, and it was just a matter of time before they could come back. So, bald eagles. Another tough one, yeah? Loons. This is our common loon, one of the most beloved birds in Maine. I just saw one in the reservoir over there that I drove by. What's that place called? I don't know. Scotticus, right on the way into town by that mill. There's one sitting right there. It's beautiful. Maine loves loons, one of the most iconic species in the state. Maine Audubon, in the early 80s, looked around and said, hey, we know that everybody loves loons, but we don't know how they're doing. Are the populations going up or down, or what's happening? Nobody knows. So we started what we call the Maine Loon Project, where we do a couple of things. One, we have an annual survey every summer, and everybody participate this year, where we go out and count loons, called the Loon Count. Thousands of volunteers out on the lakes counting the loons so we can get a sense of how the population is going up or down. We also have teamed up with Tufts Veterinary School to do necropsies on dead loons to try to figure out what happened. What we have found during that process is that one of the biggest threats to loons, one of the biggest reasons they were dying, was lead poisoning. Lead poisoning. How is a bird getting lead poisoning, right? Well, I'll tell you. Birds don't have teeth. Newsflash. But they still need to chew their food, break up their food. So what loons do, is they dive to the bottom of the lake or whatever, grab some stones off the bottom, and swallow the stones. The stones go into a special organ called a gizzard that they squeeze. It's just a muscle they squeeze that acts like that chews up their food. So the fish goes in, there's stones around, they squeeze it up and break it up. That's how they break their food up. What was happening was that fishermen using lead tackle were having some of that tackle drop off of their fishing lines and land on the bottom. And guess what? To a loon, you can't tell where the lead is and what the rock is. They don't even know what lead is. They don't even know to avoid it, right? So this picture in the yellow, those are all the pieces of lead on the bottom. And this picture doesn't have any sediment or swirling water or anything like that, and I can't tell. And kudos to you if you picked out any lead before I switched it over, but I can't do it before. So there's this sort of mystery toxic substance just sitting there. If they pick the wrong one, then it just takes 1 or 2 pieces to give them lead poisoning. But there's good news. Maine Audubon has been working for many years to phase out the sale of lead fishing tackle in Maine. A couple years ago, we helped pass a law, among many others, to ban the sale of bare lead sinkers and jigs. There was a loophole, though, and this is actually the first presentation I might be able to talk about this. There was a loophole for painted tackle. So if you had a lead sinker and you painted it white, that was safe under the law, even though the paint didn't help make it any safer for aluminum, right? So there's this big loophole that stuck in our craw for many years. This past legislative session, just 2 months ago, we passed a law to phase out painted lead tackle too. There are lots of non-lead materials out there to weight your line, to do things. We don't need to have lead on the bottoms. And guess what? Loons are doing great too. Loons are doing great. The amount of loons in the southern half of Maine, which is where we have the most reliable data, has about doubled since we started our program. And that's due in part to lead education, to wake zones, to working with lake associations, to cleaner water quality, to a lot of other factors. So loons are doing great. Okay, direct interaction. These are gulls. Okay. When I do this program on the coast, and this slide comes up, everyone's like, "Oh, gulls! I'm sick of those guys." These are 2 of our 3 common gull species. This here is a herring gull. You may have some of these up here occasionally. The most common gull we'd have here would be a ring-billed gull. I don't have it in the slide for whatever reason. Herring gull and then great black-backed gull. Very rare away from the coast. The largest gull species in the world, believe it or not. If you were to go back and read accounts of early folks visiting Maine, they would say that gulls were much more rare in olden days than they are today. They were not nearly as numerous, in part just because they weren't numerous, in part because people also raid their islands and take their eggs. And so in the 1800s, there were very few gulls on the landscape until our direct interaction to bring them back. That was landfills, right? Honestly, if you're not a picky eater, a landfill is a great place to go, right? An open landfill. And even when I started birding in the early 2000s, knew landfills as the place to go to see gulls. If you wanted to see rare gulls in the winter, if you wanted to see bald eagles, you would go to the landfill because that's where all the food was for these folks, right? And so gull numbers peaked in Maine in the mid-1990s because we had open pit landfills everywhere providing them a free, disgusting buffet, right? But what you'll find is that gulls are now one of the fastest declining species in Maine. We're not particularly concerned about that, but the reason why is because the state of Maine has closed about 400 open pit landfills in the past couple decades. So it's not the best practice for a lot of reasons, and so we're shutting the buffet down for these folks. And as part of a sort of natural reduction to normal levels, right? So, pretty interesting. Here's another crazy one. What do you got? You're right. House finch. These are house finches. Purple finches would have, the way I remember, they have like more lines on the head, some white on the head, and more reddish color. These are house finches. But, so these are very common birds in Maine. They love living around human habitation. But believe it or not, they are not strictly native here. These birds, this species is traditionally living in the desert southwest. But what happened was, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, people would capture these birds in large quantities and ship them over to the East Coast to sell as pets. They called them Hollywood finches. And so there were tons of these birds on the East Coast in cages. In the early 1900s, we passed a great law called the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, which in part banned the practice of capturing native birds for pets. Can't do it. This is the reason why whenever you watch a movie and there's a bird in it, it's always some bird not from America, because you can't have birds as actors that are native to America. It's against the law. But it means when I watch a movie, I'm like, what the heck is that? That's vultures from Africa. So this law passed, and all these pet owners, all these pet store guys are out there being like, I got a whole store full of Hollywood finches. What am I going to do? What do? They open the door, open the cages, and let these birds fly out. This happens a lot. Pets will escape, birds will escape. Sometimes they establish populations, sometimes they don't. The house finches did. And they are doing incredibly well all over the East Coast. And it's resulted in this very odd arrangement here, where you have sort of the native traditional range of the house finch on this side, and then this introduced range on this side, and they're sort of slowly meeting in the middle, right? So they come back together. Pretty cool. That's the story of the house finch. Direct interaction. We took them, brought them over, let them go, and they managed to do it on their own. This guy here.
Morning dove.
Close. This is a tricky one. This is one that we don't have. Here's a clue here. A little collar. This is a Eurasian collared dove. So this is a bird that's not really here yet, but it is coming. Let me show you how it's coming. This was another one, Eurasian. So this is not native to the United States, but again was sold in pet stores, especially in Florida. Florida, he's crazy, as you may have heard. And one of the reasons that it's crazy is it has hurricanes, right? There were a bunch of Eurasian collared doves that were in a pet store that was damaged by a hurricane in the late 80s. And the birds escaped and maybe joined some other ones from other pet stores. And let me show you what happened. So this is a map from eBird. This is a website that people use to track their bird sightings. And the purple down here is a sighting, right? Like the presence of the bird in that area. So you have a couple down here in Florida, a couple escaped Eurasian collared doves around, right? But not many. So what we're going to do is let's watch this. I'm going to cycle through the years and watch, especially down here, if you can see it, how Eurasian collared doves have grown. And this is just since 1988, okay? So we're going to go 88, 91, 93, 96. You see all Florida is covered now. 99, 2002, 2005, 2008, 2011, and then present day. Look at that, they're in Alaska, right? That was 20 years. So these birds have absolutely conquered most of the country, right? In just that 20 years after not being there at all before. They do very well in human habitation. They love to live in like parking lot street lights and stuff like that. And they've done really well. They're not really here yet, but they may be coming. So this is Maine's first record of Eurasian collared dove from 2013 in Falmouth. My colleague Doug Hitchcock saw this bird. I didn't. He makes me put it in here, this picture, to rub it in. So keep an eye out, please, would you? They do look a lot like our mourning doves, but they have this black collar. They're lighter colored overall. You know, our mourning doves have some sort of dots and things on their wings. These are mostly pale gray with that collar. Please keep an eye out. If you see one, call me. Don't call Doug. He's seen it. He's seen enough. So that's part of a direct interaction, right? They released, and now they're expanding on their own. Another sort of similar story.
Turkey vulture.
Yeah, similar stories here. There's actually two different species of vultures. We have two in the well, three, kind of the California condor, but we have the turkey vulture here, with the red head and then the gray silver trailing edge of the wing, we call it, the back half of the underwing. And then this one down here is a black vulture. Black head, wide black wings with silver, jazz hands I call them, silver on the tips of the wings, right? We have turkey vultures in Maine. We don't have black vultures yet, but we know they're coming. Here is a range map of black vultures. You can see there are lots of sightings coming up this way. Vultures are expanding pretty rapidly. We've seen it already, right? We saw it with turkey vultures. Believe it or not, the first breeding record of turkey vulture in Maine was 1983, right? Not that long ago. He was right here in Camden Hills. What was our direct interaction to help bring all these turkeys here? Well, we built roads. And what do roads produce? Roadkill. And what do turkeys eat? Roadkill. Or vultures eat roadkill, right? We have created these other buffets for these birds that eat carrion, right? And given them a lot of expansion. So as turkey vultures have expanded and become very common in Maine, black vultures likely will too. So keep your eye out again. I've seen one black vulture in Maine. Yeah.
If the vultures are really common, how come I have never even seen one?
You haven't seen one?
No.
Drive on 95 for a little while and you'll see one.
Don't even
have
on
to-
the Guilford Road,
On the Guilford
Harry's Meat Market.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're out during the day mostly because they fly on these thermals. They fly without really flapping their wings. They soar around. And they nest, I don't know where they would nest around here. They nest on like cliff places. So keep your eye out. They're around. They are starting their fall migration actually right now. And so look around, especially in the middle of a hot day, as they
I
may
may
be passing.
have seen them, but they've been flying up, so I couldn't tell what they were.
They do fly high. Look for this silver, the black and silver combination. Don't really look at the red head because you got to kind of be closer to see that. But then for these guys, look for the all black with the silver on the ends. And what I'll tell you, what these turkey vultures very rarely flap. Like when they're taken off, they do, but in the air. Black vultures flap a little. They'll do a triple flap. They'll go flap, 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 flap. Okay? They don't say that. It's a sort of sound effect. Vultures on their way. Going back through. What can you do? Direct interaction. I don't know. Don't shoot animals out of the hunting season. If you have an open pit landfill and want to convert it, do that. I don't know what else to say. Don't keep pets illegally. All right, climate change. This is another man-made change that we're causing. The poster child in Maine for climate change expansion is this.
Acorn woodpecker.
Close.
Red belly.
Red belly wood. Do you have a red belly up here? Probably
Yes.
not. You do?
I had him at my view.
Okay. Red-bellied woodpeckers. This is one of the worst named species that we have. There already is a different woodpecker, not in Maine, called the red-headed woodpecker. So that's already taken. The red belly, if you look, comes from the days when people didn't have good binoculars. They had to shoot everything to identify it. And if you hold a red-bellied woodpecker here, you see that it's got a little red belly right there. Red-bellied woodpecker. Red-bellied woodpeckers are expanding in Maine. When I started birding again, they were extremely rare. This was like tell all your birding friends that there's a red-bellied woodpecker. Now they're at my feeders every day. They're all of us. How do we know that it's climate related? It's called something called Birdman's rule, which is a law of biology that says that where you have a species that its range goes from north to south, that the ones in the north, the individuals in the north, are bigger than the ones in the south. Okay, so this holds for all kinds of different species. If you think about black bears, right? Black bears live in Florida, they live in Maine. On average, the black bears in Maine are bigger than the ones in Florida. And that's a climatic adaptation, right? They need to be bigger here because it's colder and they need to be fatter. In Florida, they don't need to have fat because it's warmer down there. And so you can measure, and there's all kinds of species this applies to, you can measure species size from north to south. So with red-bellied woodpeckers, they followed Birdman's rule as well. So the ones that lived in Florida were smaller than the ones that lived in what was the northern part of their range, the mid-Atlantic, right? This was 1950 or so. But what has happened is as red-bellied woodpeckers have expanded, the individuals that live in the northern part now in Maine, they are the biggest of their species. And importantly, the ones that live in Pennsylvania are smaller than they used to be, right? So this shows that as climate has changed, their bodies have changed to suit the climate, okay? It doesn't need to be sort of as complicated as that. There are tons of species that we know here as typically southern species that now are common. Smooth mud crab, whatever that is, it used to be found. It's a Chesapeake species. Carolina wren, black sea bass. There are all kinds of species that are more common now, traditionally southern, that can live here. the National Audubon Society did a great report a couple of years ago modeling out climate, potential climate impacts. And what they did was that they modeled, so we know where certain species live, we know what habitat needs they have, what ranges are now, and we can predict with some accuracy, I didn't do it, but scientists smarter than me can model out how habitats will change under different temperature and climatic conditions. And so what the National Audubon Society did was they made maps based on current range, based on a 1.5 degree average shift and a 3 degree average shift by 2080. And they said, what do we think birds under that scenario, where are they going to live? And basically what it means for the thing here is that a blue and green means the habitat will be better for that species with a warmer temperature. Red and orange means it'll be worse. Okay, so on a 1.5 degree change by 2080, much of southern Maine becomes too hot for loons, right? Common loons. And we know this, southern Maine already is the southern edge of loon breeding range. There's one pair, I think, in Massachusetts, but we're sort of the stronghold. By 2080, most all of the water in Maine will be too warm. Bobolinks, we sort of live in a band of bobolink habitat currently. The southern edge of their range will be too warm, not good for them, but they will move north. So when we think about climate change, it's actually important to think about it's not a complete failure, it's a shifting northward, right? So areas that are now tundra or boreal will change to eastern forest or change to boreal, and the species who live in them can move up, right? So that's sort of important to think about as we think about ranges shifting. For a lot of species, it'll be a shift, not a sort of elimination. Where it gets challenging is the species who have nowhere to go, right? So species that already live in the northern tundra that don't have a place to expand into. In Maine, we don't really have that problem, but we will expect a shift northward for basically all of our species. For some species, this means they'll become more abundant in Maine. So this is a wood thrush. This is typically a bird of southern areas. There are some in Maine, southern Maine. Evergreen Cemetery is where I go to get them. The habitat, especially all through northern Maine, is likely to improve for them. And the same goes for a bunch of sort of eastern forest species. A lot of birds that sort of top out now in southern Maine. And their habitat is typically, you think of down through New York, New Jersey, Maryland, places like that. Maine is likely, climatically, going to become similar to those places the way they are now. And so some of the big ones that'll take a hit under these predictions are our boreal birds, right? Maine is famous for having boreal habitat. This is that beautiful spruce habitat that is famous among birders like me because we have boreal chickadee and spruce grouse and Canada jay, birds that you can't get in southern Maine, you can't get in large parts of the rest of the country. As the boreal habitat that they need shifts northward, those birds are going to shift northward. We haven't, like I said, we don't have the results of the new Maine Bird Atlas now, but we're going to see, I know, a very clear northward movement of boreal species. For example, Mount Desert Island, just 20 years ago, you could get spruce grouse, boreal chickadee. They're not there anymore. Washington County, there's very few. But, and so it's a bit of a mixed bag, but unless we do something about climate, these species are likely to move forward. But the good thing is that we can do something about this, right? There are a lot of people today who are not scared of climate change and not scared of tackling it. Like I said, in all these other examples, once we recognize the impacts that we're having and we change our behavior, the birds come back, right? Climate change is a bigger problem. It's a worldwide problem. But the gist is the same. If we recognize our problem, we reverse what we're doing, and we change our behavior, the birds are going to be there or come back. But it takes all of our help. So that's all I got. Thank you very much. Plenty of time for questions if anybody has them. Yes, young lady.
I don't have a question, I have a story.
Okay, story.
One time a downy woodpecker flew into our window. She was okay, but she couldn't fly, so we gave her seeds and water until she could.
Aww.
After a few hours, she trusted us more, and we got to pat her.
Get to pat her, cool. Cool. And then did she fly away eventually?
Yeah,
And Downy?
the next morning.
Good. Yep, birds fly into windows all the time. Believe it or not, scientists think that about 1 billion birds in the U.S. die from colliding into windows every year. The windows reflect the habitat or the sky and tricks birds. But thank you for taking care of that species. Yeah.
What's your favorite bird?
Ooh, what's my favorite bird?
You said that one of your favorites was even roasted about it.
So many favorites. You know, I am a birder. What that means for me is I want to see all the birds. So I have seen 365 birds species in Maine. And so my favorite is the next one I haven't seen. So right now I'm trying to track down, and this is what's exciting about birding, is that you're sitting at your desk, bored, and then you get this alert that says someone has seen a royal tern on Hills Beach. And I say, I'm feeling a little sick. I think I need to rest and not work anymore. And then I drive to Hills Beach in the middle of the day, and then all of a sudden I'm standing in Hills Beach when I thought I'd be doing some meeting, looking at a cool bird. Birding is wicked fun for that because of the excitement of having to go. Plus, you got to go, even if you're taking an actual vacation day from work, you got to go everywhere. You know, I grew up fishing, right? Fishing is fun, except you're catching the same bass over and over and over. In birding, I have to go on a boat to the middle of the Gulf of Maine to try to find shearwaters. I have to go to the top of Katahdin to find, breeding pipits. I have to go to brownfield bog to find yellowthroated vireos. You have to go everywhere in every type of habitat if you want to find the birds. And so I don't have a favorite. I just sort of love it all. Sorry, that's very unsatisfying.
I was just going to say
Time to dim out? Sorry, that's a good answer. Yeah.
Did you see that Siberian eagle or?
Oh, yeah.
The big one that was down
Sure.
there?
Stellar sea eagle.
Yeah.
I did. Did anyone else see the stellar? Has anyone else heard of this?
I've heard of it.
Oh, folks, have you not heard of this? Oh, goodness. This is the craziest. Give me just 1 minute. Like I said, one of the coolest parts of birding is that birds can just fly wherever they want. What's really to stop a bird from just getting up and flying across the ocean? I mean, other than that's a really long way, nothing. They can get up and do it if they want to, and sometimes it happens. And sometimes you'll be sitting there at your at your backyard in Fairfield, or in Dover Foxcroft, and you look out and there's a northern meteor, or some bird that's supposed to be in Mexico, or some bird that's supposed to be somewhere else. That happens, and it's awesome. Maine recently experienced one of the most famous of these examples, which is that there's a bird called a Steller's sea eagle. Steller's sea eagle is the largest and rarest eagle in the world. It lives normally in Siberia. It's crazy looking. It's this huge eagle with this huge, so like a bald eagle, it's got a big bill, right? Imagine 3 of those bills stacked. It's like a Muppet bill. It's like this. It's like it's huge. Let me get a picture. Hold on. One of they live in Siberia, but one day, a couple years ago, a guy in Alaska took a picture of a Steller sea eagle flying around. I'm just going to do this really quick. Open, I say. Oh, never mind. It was a big eagle. He saw it in Alaska, and weird things happen in Alaska, so all the other birds in the country were like, oh, that's cool, good for him. Then, a couple months later, there was a guy on a boat in a reservoir near San Antonio, Texas. And he goes out and he's boating, and he sees a Steller sea eagle. And he takes a picture and sends it around. People are like, what? That's all. People are like, what? Never seen again. Okay, gone. Then a couple months later, there were some birders up in northern Canada who see a Steller sea eagle, and they see it well. And this is in Ontario, and they take pictures of it. And they compare the pictures of the Ontario bird to the Alaska bird. And by looking at, this bird has this big wing with a white patch here and then black, and it's like a jagged edge of feathers, white into black. They compare that edge, and it's the same edge. It's like a fingerprint. This is the same bird. This is one bird that's just cruising around the country, just flying around. We don't know for sure that the Texas bird was that bird, but we do think it was. So this bird is like, I'm out of here, Siberia. I'm flying to Alaska. Boring. I'm going to go to Texas. Too hot. Flew across, the Rocky Mountains? I don't know, right? How to get there. Goes all the way back up over Chicago. Nobody knows how, where. It's in Ontario. It's bouncing around. So birders are watching up there. This is during the pandemic. And so birders would and could in normal years, drive to Ontario. Maine, you know, I have friends who've driven 24 hours straight to Newfoundland to see some kestrel, right? But the border was closed because it was a pandemic. So all these birders in Maine are like, ah! Because the Steller Seagull is a dream bird. It is like one of the coolest looking birds ever, and it's not a bird, there aren't a lot of birding trips to Siberia normally. And so this is a bird that we never thought we'd see in the wild. We're bouncing around. Okay, this is where I come in. It's December 31st, the last day before the New Year's, and what happens? What a lot of birders do is they keep track of their year list. They see as many birds a year as they can, and then the last day of the year, you're trying to like clean up, trying to get some stuff. So my wife let me go. So I'm sitting in this parking lot trying to find this rare, that's not even that cool, sparrow. It's in the back of an auto garage, and I'm sitting there. This stinks because the bird's not there. It's raining, and I'm not seeing it. I look at my phone, and there's a comment on my website because I'd written about this blog on this bird on my blog, and it's this woman who says it's at 5 Islands in Georgetown. And I'm like, what? She doesn't leave her contact, nothing. So I stalk her on the internet quickly because I'm sitting in my car, nothing to do, and I find her page, and I message her, and I go, "Are you talking about this bird in 5 Islands, Maine? Do you have a picture?" And she sends me a picture. And it's a grainy little picture, but it's a Steller Seagull. And it is on at that point. We sound the alarm. So this is like 5 p.m. Get up there. We drive up to 5 Islands, and it's dark. So we don't see anything. But the whole community in Maine is going bananas. The next day, so have everyone been to 5 Islands in Georgetown, Maine? It's like a 1-lane road, this beautiful little lobster thing. These lobstermen are out there pulling their traps out. It's a very casual day. This is January 1st. Actually, I'm sorry, this is the 31st, so this is the last day. There are like 700 birders there. Cars for miles along the roads, and all these lobstermen are like, what is happening? And we're there, and guess what? Steller Seagull flies over. And people are going bonkers. This is the craziest bird ever, and it's in Maine. The bird stayed there for about 3 months, bouncing between Booth Bay and Georgetown. And it's national news. It's international news. For Maine Audubon, it's the biggest story we've ever had. I was on live TV in Brazil. I did a morning show in Nebraska about this. Like, hey, you got them eggs. You got that eagle up there, huh? What's this? What's this? I hear you got an eagle up there. And people were flying from all over the country. It's awesome. Bird leaves. We don't know what happens. It's still seen in Newfoundland, right? So it spends the summer last year in Newfoundland, comes back to Maine this past winter, and now is back in Newfoundland, still alive. It's sort of a north-south shift that mirrors its north-south shift between Siberia and South Korea, or northern Japan, where it normally does. So it's just sort of bouncing around, living here. So this winter, fingers crossed, you can probably drive down to Booth Bay or 5 Islands or wherever it shows up down that part of the mid-coast and see this bird. But it's a real celebrity. Phew, okay, that's my story. Yes?
Under direct action, you didn't mention feeding birds in one's backyard. Is that good or bad or indifferent? Should you do it year-round or just for the winter?
I would say indifferent. It's both. It's good because you can enjoy the birds and the birds get some food. Birds don't rely on any feeder for their whole thing. We get questions a lot saying, I'm going on vacation, are my birds going to die? That kind of feeders. No, birds are smart enough to know that they need to spread their food around. And still the vast majority of their food comes from the wild. And so bird feeding is it's good if done right. Where there can be dangers is that if seed gets moldy. So anytime you're bringing birds together, they can transmit diseases to each other. So you may have heard of the avian influenza that's been going around. There's also a conjunctivitis that affects finches. But sometimes we recommend people stop feeding in certain circumstances if there's an illness around or we think that there's an outbreak of conjunctivitis to prevent birds from sort of coming together to share. But otherwise, it brings so much delight to people, and there hasn't really been a harm identified that we support it. if bears are attacking your feeders, then take them down. But otherwise, have fun. Summer, winter, certainly birds in the winter are looking for seeds. Birds in the summer are looking mostly for insects. And so feeding, you can still do it. I mean, plenty of birds still eat in the summer, but they're mostly looking elsewhere because insects are really what grows their babies. The other thing I'll say is that think creatively about food. So like suet, cut an orange in half if you want Orioles, hummingbird feeders, things like that. There's a lot of other things besides the seed that'll get birds in.
I did feel kind of bad about feeding my birds when the hawk came down. I grabbed a bird right in the living room window and slammed the bird in a hawk window, and I just felt really bad. We went out and the hawk kind of looked at us like, "What are you going to do about it?"
Well, that's a bird feeder for them too.
It's like I thought, no, I just felt bad.
It's a bird feeder too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
I
like.
felt like I was setting a buffet up there for
Yeah.
I did move my feeders back into the trees for things and stuff.
Okay.
Try to-
The hawks will get them no matter what. So,
Yeah.
Yes, you.
In the 1980s, we had a great gray owl
Oof.
that came and spent the winter
Oh,
across
a
the
bird I've
street
never
from
seen.
us. And,
Bird I've chased all over Maine and never
and
seen.
it was there all winter
Oh, great.
in the same tree, and then
Wow.
it was gone.
Yep.
And we never had a great gray owl again. I wondered, do the great gray owls come into Maine very much, or?
Not very much, very rarely. Great gray owls are the largest owl in the country. They're gigundous, gray with this little sort of white, like bow tie sort of here. They do not come to Maine very often. They typically are found in the winter, and to be honest, frankly, it's usually when they are not feeding very well north and they're trying to come far away to find food. A lot of times you find great gray owls in Maine, they're not in the best shape because this is really not where they're supposed to be, and they're expanding for food. But they are around occasionally. I don't know, once every 2 or 3 years, maybe. I have driven after a dozen. You've never seen. So congratulations. Good for you. But it'll be tough to replicate that, I think, because they are so rare. But that's
We used
great.
to get a lot of phone calls from Connecticut.
That bird's
Is it
still there?
still there?
It's still there? Yeah. Yep. Yep. Yes.
I have a fact about chickadees.
A fact about chickadees. Lay it on me.
Well, chickadees keep a map of where all the good food sources are in their brain.
Yeah.
Sometimes other birds will try to follow them because they're smart enough to understand that chickadees know where good
Yeah,
sources
that's
are.
absolutely right. One of the reasons I love chickadees is because they are locals. They don't migrate. Well, sometimes they do, but most of the time they just stay in one patch and they know it like the back of their feathers, and they know where all the food sources are. And truly, especially I found this in fall migration, where if you're like, where are all the birds? You listen for chickadees and then follow them, because all kinds of other birds will follow the chickadees around because they know where all the good spots are. Chickadees also, and titmice, do a thing called caching, where to prepare for the winter, they take seeds and like stick them in parts of bark or stick them in little places that they remember, and they have their brain expands by like 30% to remember where they stuck all these seeds, so that when the winter comes, they know where all these things are. And scientists are like looking at chickadee brains to see like, hey, can we expand our brains by 30%? Would be great to do. Chickadees are awesome. Chickadees are awesome.
I love them.
Good factoid. Any other questions, comments, complaints? One more, yeah.
I once saw a great horned owl right in my backyard. Yeah.
Oh, you guys have got good birds.
Yep.
Good for you.
We also have a cardinal pair, two
A Maine
titmice,
cardinal
a
pair.
million
Cool.
evening grosbeaks. In the winter, we get tons of common red palms.
Good. You guys got good birds. Well, thanks for coming out, everybody. I really appreciate it. Oh, one more, hit back.
How was Puffins doing in Maine?
Puffins are doing okay right now. Puffins are a species. Well, so first of all, they were extirpated from Maine, largely due to people stealing their eggs. This was, seabird egg hunting was a big deal back in the 1800s or the 1900s. Now it's gone. In the 70s, the National Audubon Society reintroduced puffins to Maine, this big famous reintroduction, and they have done really well, and they're still doing really well. There are species that we're concerned about, though, because we are on the very southern edge of their breeding range. Maine is the only state that has breeding Atlantic puffins, and the Gulf of Maine is changing as fast as any water body on Earth. And we don't know what that's going to mean for the food that puffins like. They like little fish called sand lance and other things. If the populations of those fish move out of the Gulf or change, so they're too far away from the breeding islands, puffins may have a hard time remaining in Maine. But we haven't necessarily seen that yet. We have seen some expansion of more southerly seabird species, especially laughing gulls, that are taking over some of these seabird islands. But it's being managed, so it's okay now. So puffins are doing great. I would see them while you can. There's a great boat out of Booth Bay. Eastern Egg Rock has some good trips. But they're here, and they're gorgeous right now. Okay, thanks everyone. Appreciate you coming out.
Nice talk.